Horns high, everybody. Welcome to Metal 40 Plus, the first episode of the new season. I'm Mr. Scott, and joining me here is my fellow Shadow Cult podcasting partner. He's my boy. He's taught me a lot about metal in most recent years. You know him as Thrash Maniac 99. We also know him as Levi. Welcome, my friend.
Thanks for having me on one of these finally.
Yes, finally, yes. Yeah, now that I've decided to collaborate with other metalheads out there for this series, the first one I want to do this year, I wanted to get Levi on here. And as you can see on the screen, the album we are talking about over there is an interesting one. And it was his choice to pick, Slayer, Hell Awaits. What made you want to do this album?
Well, first and foremost, it's my personal favorite Slayer album, and on top of that, if you ask me, best metal album of 1985.
Tall statement right there, but
and I mean, 85,
totally
so many great albums in 85, but there was just something about Hell Awaits that just stood out even more than, say, like Exodus or Possessed, Celtic Frost, Halloween, Creator, amongst Megadeth, among Anthrax, among so many albums. Because after all, like, this was, if you ask me, this was the album where Slayer truly became Slayer. Whereas, like, Show No Mercy was still very much inspired by the whole Nawabum scene, like lots of Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, some Merciful Fate in there. Whereas here, less about speed metal or like early black metal elements and more straight up thrash and, dare I say, almost towards death metal a little bit too.
Yes. Yeah, there's definitely elements of that throughout the entire piece. So as we'll be talking here, we're going to be listening to a song that he has chosen as well. I don't know if you want to call it a deep cut, but it is the longest track in the album. It is called Crypts of Eternity. So we're going to be listening to some of the song, take a break, talk about stuff, listen again, and so forth. So follow along at home if you want to. We're going to start off with the song. Let's not waste any time and get into the Crypts of Eternity. There's your introduction to that song right there, folks. You can definitely hear how much the style of Slayer was evolving. It wasn't all about, crazy fast, super high intensity type stuff. There was dynamics happening. Things were building up. The songs were building more. Very experimentative, too, for the band at the time. So, April 1985, April 8th, I believe it is 1985, is when this album drops. It is the second studio album from Slayer. Their debut album, which came out in 83, Show No Mercy, the highest selling release of Metal Blade at that time. Around the 40 to 50,000 units were sold of that one. So Brian Slagle was like, we got to get a new album out from these guys as soon as possible. They put out Live Undead in 84, so they wanted to get back in the studio and put out some more stuff. And this was the album that came to be. For its time, and as Levi said, highly regarded, one of the best metal albums of 1985, and it really was demonstrating the growth of the band.
Yeah, definitely, and like especially on this track, like I picked this one for being the longest track of the album. It's almost borderline progressive a little bit for their sound at this point, because as Slayer continued to evolve, with Rain and Blood a year after this, and then South of Heaven, Seasons in the Abyss, like I consider Hell Awaits to be the beginning of the golden era of Slayer that starts here through to Seasons in the Abyss. But especially with this track, like with the galloping rhythms, it's like there's still a little bit of that Iron Maiden element to the song, just done at a heavier, more sinister level with those like Maiden-esque gallops and the bass work. But of course, as we continue on to the song, you're going to hear a lot of tropes of what death metal would pick up on.
Yeah, and it makes sense to mention that, and this is on record too, Kerry King has stated in many interviews, a huge influence for this album, Merciful Fate. He very much refers to it as the Merciful Fate album. And you can hear, not because Slayer was trying to, emulate the Merciful Fate style in any way, shape, or form. They were utilizing the influence of the arranging and the harmonies that happen. There's a lot of guitar harmonies on this album in general. And you can hear all those influences coming from Merciful Fate as well as other bands, but mostly from Fate. So let's get back into the crypts of eternity.
Incantation, fill the murky night. Free the devil's knights of hell, unleash the growing spite. Directing power forcibly, the fire of hell's cast. Resurrect the curse of death, a demon from the past. I have seen the darkest depths of hell.
wanted to wait for the scream before it took another break there. If anyone's noticing, Levi's a drummer, by the way. That's why he's doing a lot of air drums happening there. So
Yeah,
it's all
not
good.
a great drummer at all, but
Hey,
I try.
it's all good. Expressing in your love for this kind of music is great. What's also great is like you can stare on my other screen here. I have what people see over here. I have the album cover. You can just stare at this thing because like I always like feel like I pick up something different. There's just so much going on, even though it looks very simplistic. There's like just this. Oh my God! There's such imagery being presented by this. So let's get into the songs on the album. There are 7 songs. 7 songs on this album. That's it. And they start going into a little bit more longer arrangements with the songs, demonstrating more of their growth as musicians and songwriters. Starts out with Hell Awaits, the iconic opening there, join us, and welcome back, the whole nine. I hear so much, I hear a lot of a Merciful Fate influence with that song itself. Specifically 2 songs off Don't Break the Oath. I hear The Oath and I hear A Dangerous Meeting because of the way the song builds. You have the opening of Hell Awaits with all this noise happening in the background, and you're basically
your guitar squeals.
All the noise that's happening there. Very reminiscent of like the noise that's happening before in the beginning of The Oath, or even the beginning of Black Sabbath, with the rain and thunder and all the soundscapes, even something like from Bathory too. And as the song starts to build up, you have this one guitar that's kind of doing a very easy syncopated riff. The drums are building up behind it. The other guitar is doing something over top of it. Very reminiscent of Dangerous Meetings, but it was one of the first things that popped in my head re-listening to this album. The song is iconic, Hell Awaits in and of itself, not just being the title track, but it is a solid song, and the perfect song to start a Slayer concert as well, having seen it, yes. So that's definitely one of the most popular ones. We've got Kill Again, we've got At Dawn They Sleep, or as Tom Araya would say live, At Dawn They Sleep. It was always a way of thinking. And man, I can hear so much Cronus influence too in Tom's vocals still at this point. You can almost if you close your eyes and really listen, it's like shit, that sounds like Conrad singing in there too, but it's just as cool as anything else. Then we have Praise of Death, Necrophiliac, this song Crypts of Eternity, the longest song, clocking in at 6:40. And then we have Hardening of the Arteries. Interesting point about this song too to mention is that we start the album and we end the album the same way. It's the same riff and drum pattern that's being used at the beginning of Hell Awaits when everyone comes in, and when Hardening of the Arteries is ending. They all go back to that same exact same pattern to it. So it's as you enter, you leave the same way. What are some of the more standout tracks for you of the ones we just went over?
Well, Praise of Death was always a big one for me because, like, I would say out of all the songs on this album, that one was probably the big one for Dave Lombardo at the time, showcasing his overall drum ability, particularly the double bass work. Because there are 2 double bass breaks on that song. One while Tom's vocals are going crazy over the top, and then after the solos, and it kind of slows down, and it almost repeats back to how Hell Awaits started with the guitar squeals, creating this atmosphere, and then suddenly just into blazing fast tremolo riff and Lombardo just going ham on the double bass. At Dawn They Sleep, like that one probably for being one of the more groovier songs of the album, like less about speed until you get to the end, but also has some of the most evil sounding riffs for Slayer at this point. And then of course this track. Now I brought up the tropes that death metal would pick up on with this song. That one section where it's like triplet chugs. You will hear that in so many bands just a few years after this album. Most notably Morbid Angel, Cannibal Corpse, Deicide, Suffocation. Like pretty much almost every death metal band would cite that song as a big pillar influence to the genre in terms of doing those more triplet rhythms and chugging riffs. Like immediate, Morbid Angel would be the first band I would think of that utilized that side of thrash and really expanded into something of their own.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely a journey for Slayer fans to listen to something like Show No Mercy and then sit down and really listen to this one. And like you said, think about all the bands and all the music that came after this, and you can hear the subtle little influences that Slayer had on all those bands, an entire scene, an entire genre of metal that was yet to be created. So we're going to finish up this song, and then we're going to talk about the band Slayer in context of the time this came out, which was a turning point for the band, definitely. That roll right at the end there, just oh my god,
Yeah.
absolute insanity there. So that is Crypts of Eternity from Hell Awaits right there. This was, as I said, this was a turning point for the band because they really started to get a lot more notoriety. A lot more fans were becoming aware of them, aware of their music. This was heavily voted on by fans as like in various different circles as the best metal album of 1985, as Levi was referring to earlier. They went out on tour to support this album. They were on tour, actually, when this album came out, with Exodus and Venom. It was the Combat Tour, and you can check out a home release called The Ultimate Revenge. It is on YouTube in its entirety, where you'll see the live performances from Exodus, Slayer, and Venom. Interviews with the band, too. Highly inebriated, and
Yes.
leads
especially Jeff.
Yes, his beer sucks.
But it's free.
But it's free. And Tom Araya like says nothing. He just looks in the camera, doing shit like that.
And Lombardo catches a piece of ham in his mouth. I think.
Yes, that leads also to the infamous story on Venom's bus.
Yes.
Yeah. Basically, anyone out there wants to know, a lot of the boys in the tour were drinking it up, hanging out on the bus. And Tom Araya, what happens when you imbibe a lot of alcohol? He had to pee. And he was looking for the bathroom. And Cronus, the vocalist and bass player of Venom, jokingly said, right here. Tom Araya thought he was serious and started to pee on him. Got in his hair, and Cronus cracks Tom
right in the face.
Right in the face. They get into it. Had to break him up. Like, yeah, don't joke about that stuff when you're with inebriated
when you're drunk.
musicians. No, don't do that kind of stuff. But regardless of that story, I had to share it because it's so apropos of the time frame. Because this was a very young, immature, if you will, musical genre that was still trying to find its footing. You had Metallica, you had Megadeth, you had Slayer, you had Testament, Legacy becoming Testament, you had Exodus, you had all this stuff coming out of the West Coast. You had Anthrax and the Overkill and the punk hardcore scene coming out of New York. So it was flourishing. The Get Thrashed documentary got into it very detailed. So check that out too. That's on YouTube as well. Everything's on YouTube, just like we are. Make sure you hit the like button, please. And this is really a big turning point for the band musically, creatively, exposure-wise, because it was on and on and on. They get to Rain and Blood after this and South of Heaven, and we get to my personal favorite album from the band is Seasons in the Abyss. I think it's the most musically diverse of the band in that golden era, like you're referring to, the essential four of Slayer. It's Tom, Kerry, Jeff, rest in peace, and Dave. That's Slayer. Paul Bostaph, Gary Holt, all respect to those guys and what they have done to help carry on Slayer. But I mean, those four guys are it as far as I'm concerned. Where do you think, in the grand pantheon of Slayer, Hell Awaits falls?
Well, I mean, Kerry might have different opinions about it. Like, he wouldn't have, maybe not so Kerry, but mostly, like, a lot of the fans kind of put this album in the middle when it comes to their discography. I say, for me, at least objectively, it's number 3 behind Seasons and Rain and Blood. Just because, like, pretty much everything you hear Slayer do from this point on starts with this album. Like I said earlier, this is really where Slayer truly became Slayer, and not so much worshiping the altar of Priest and Maiden and those kind of bands like they were on Show No Mercy. But, you could even argue the Haunting the Chapel EP that came out in 84 was also the big turning point that led to this. But, yeah, and this would end up being their final release on Metal Blade, and then it was because of how amazing this album was that Rick Rubin signed them to American Recordings, Def Jam, what have you, and produced pretty much the majority of Slayer's albums from here until sometime in the 2000s, or at least get involved in some way, shape, or form. I mean, yeah, the 90s after Seasons in the Abyss, this is peaks and valleys, mostly a lot of valleys, like, whoa, ascending to rock bottom by the end of the decade. But with Hell Awaits, yeah, it still holds a strong toehold on the entire extreme metal scene, not just thrash, but all of extreme metal. Like, even black metal bands would probably cite this album as a huge influence, like Mayhem and Immortal, Dark Throne. But most importantly, to death metal, like Terry Butler from Death, Obituary, among many other bands, would say that this was really the album that started what death metal would become. Well, granted, Possessed, Seven Churches the same year, and Celtic Frost to Megatherion. But it was really starting with here, and most especially on Rain and Blood, and Creator, Pleasure to Kill, and Dark Angels, Darkness Descends, all in 86. That's really where you saw the death metal bands really take influences from those albums. And then you fast forward to 87, and death metal is officially born, thanks to Death and Sepultura and Necrophagia, among many others.
And it just goes on and on and on. The influence of Slayer has not stopped. It will not stop. Even though they retired, I'm done with this shit, jackass. I had to throw that in there. Because it's like, it's the way of Terry Funk. Like, yeah, we're retired, but not really. That kind of thing.
And you could even argue grindcore took a lot from Slayer, too. Especially when it came to speed. Like, you ask guys from Napalm Death and Repulsion, they would say Slayer was one of the big influences on why they wanted to play fast or faster than any other band in the world, especially Repulsion. Like, even you listen to a song like Radiation Sickness off the Horrified album, that's straight up Slayer worship right there, with the riffs and the speed, despite blast beats, which Slayer, to my recollection, never did blast beats, even though it would have been amazing to hear Lombardo do blast, because we know he's capable of it, because he's arguably the greatest drummer in metal history. Well, I would always say he or Gene Hoglan, but then again, if it weren't for Hoglan teaching Lombardo how to play double bass, who's to say where Lombardo would end up? Even though Hoagland's younger than Lombardo, Hoagland taught him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy to think about all the little nuances that come throughout the entire scene.
All the different friendships and that whole thrash scene back in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and what came from it, what it has become, where it's going to go, and it's undeniable the influence that Slayer as a band, their sound, and an album like Hell Awaits has on them. As it turns the Big 4-0 in 2025. So there's plenty more albums to talk about. Turning 40 this year. I want to thank Levi for hanging out with me and talking a little bit about this album. You have done many rankings on your YouTube channel. The link to his YouTube channel will be down in the description, folks. Check it out, please. You have done the Slayer, and you have 6 or 7 lined up for this year, I believe.
6. So what's the lineup for this year? So February, I'm going to be touching on Gojira. I got to start getting into listening to their stuff. I've just been kind of busy today with listening to other stuff that I've been doing reviews for. April, I'm going to be talking about Creator. Brought up Creator earlier. I'm finally going to talk about all their albums. Even the bad era of the mid to late 90s. That's going to be fun. June, I'm going to be talking about arguably the greatest supergroup in music history, Bloodbath. And then August, finally going to be talking about my favorite tech death band of all time, Nile. October, I'm going to be talking about Overkill. And then December, since it's wintertime, what better to do than black metal legends, Shooter.
There you go. So that's
the lineup for this year.
That's lined up for this year. On top of that, Levi loves doing album reviews. He does under the radar reviews as well.
Used to,
but you should do it.
This year I'm just doing 4 reviews every week, or however many as I can.
Yeah, and he's been pumping out reviews constantly. So make sure you're subscribed to his channel and check all that stuff out. As well as other stuff that you do on your channel too. Sometimes he and I and some of our other friends, we talk pro wrestling or we talk about anything else. Maybe we play some games, do that stuff as well. And just have a lot of fun doing it in the meantime. But definitely one of the big commonalities we have is the love of this music, and it has brought us together as it does so many different people around the world. And we hope all of you out there hang out here and for more episodes of the series that'll be coming to you. I'm trying to do one a month, and I want to have somebody else hanging with me every time I do one, collaborate with as many metalheads, maybe multiple metalheads as the year progresses, to talk about other albums coming to the 40s, into their midlife crisis, if you will, happening this year. There's got to be a group of dads out there that has a metal band called Midlife Crisis. That has to be a thing. Somebody has to find that.
Well, there is the Faith No More song, Midlife Crisis.
That's a song. I'm talking about a bunch of old dudes like me, a bunch of dads that get together and just do an album or a band called Midlife Crisis. I think that needs to happen. If anybody's interested, I'm a bass player, so let me know. DM me. So in the meantime, enjoy this album, everybody. Make sure you listen to it. Hell Awaits is a classic, and listen to the entire discography right there, as Levi's got it down there. So I thank Levi.
Except for Diabolos and Musica, avoid that album at all costs.
We were trying to get through the entire episode without bringing it up. I was going to be a good boy and not mention it, but he had to, because when Ricky sees this, he's going to say something. And we're talking about our friend Horror Master. Shout out to our boy Ricky. So enjoy this. I hope you enjoyed this episode, everybody. Stick with me throughout the years. We have some other metalheads on here talking about other great albums turning 40 this year. Like this video, comment, subscribe, do all that cool stuff. Check out Levi's stuff down in the description too. In the meantime, my friends, keep those horns high
and your dreams wet.